Okay, so today we are going to talk about detailing your pinch pot. So by this point you should have something that looks something like this, where you have your pinch pot, you have even walls all the way around, no thicker than the width of your thumb, and you've added your coil foot. Now I'm going to show you today how to detail out your pinch pot, what to look for, and what things you could do to make your pinch pot look to the best it can. So the one thing that I'm noticing when I'm looking at my pinch pot here is that the opening is nice and even, but it's not super round. And one thing that I like to do to make it rounder is to take the top of my thumb and just go around in a circle and go around and around and around, maybe even sometimes getting your finger a little wet and going around and around to make that opening nice and even all the way around. In a perfect world, you would have the inside circle and the outside circle be the same, so they would be nice and even. Another tool that you could use is your sponge all the way around the edges to really clean it up, sometimes kind of turning it into sort of like a little taco around the edges, really help to clean up the opening so that you have nice clean openings. Of course, the walls, you could either use your sponge, back and forth, back and forth. The rib tool that you made is another good one to really clean it up, smooth out those walls, and detail it out. Now, in regards to the coil foot, the cool thing once you put this foot on here is it's actually movable. So even though it feels like it's stuck where it is, it actually can kind of move. If you press and put pressure on the outside edge or on the inside edge, you could see how that coil can kind of move around. And one thing you want to be sure of is that that coil is nice and blended in. You shouldn't see any lines where that coil meets the pinch pot. So you can see how I'm kind of using the side of my thumb and my fingers over and over and over again to push and move it until it's perfectly centered and the inside ring and the outside ring are even. So I'm going to go ahead and even the sponge is a great tool here, over and over and over to clean up those edges and really smooth out that coil. So you want a nice even transition from the coil into the pinch pot. If you have part of your coil that's not fully blended in here, what's going to happen when it starts to dry is air is going to get underneath there and it's actually going to separate itself from the pot and it's going to be kind of unsettling. It's not going to look really detailed. It's going to be kind of ugly and you're not going to like it. So again, all different ways that you can smooth out that coil foot. I always like to do the tap test, I call it, where you kind of go tap, 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 and then see where it's a little thicker and a little thinner. And here's where you can kind of pinch. You can move some clay around. I like to use just the tip of my thumb here and really clean up that coil foot. And again, that coil foot allows air to pass underneath your pinch pot so that it doesn't crack or explode in the kiln. So again, I'm going to kind of move that coil just to make sure it's nice and centered on my pinch pot. I'm going to look at it from a bird's eye view, meaning right on top, and I'm going to make sure that that coil is right in the center, right where I want it, and nice and blended in. Now is the point where I want to talk about adding your name. Now, it's important that you add your name to your project. We have lots of students and lots of projects going in and out of the kiln, and the only way we're going to make sure that we get this back to you is if it has your name and period number on it. Now, you could do this in a variety of ways, in a variety of places. You have two options when it comes to your name. You can choose the first initial of your first name and your full last name, along with your period number. Or you could choose your whole first name and your last initial and your period number. In this particular instance, I'm going to choose my first name, last initial, and my period number. Some different tools that you're going to want to use to carve into your project. You're going to want to make sure that your project is slightly leather hard, if not medium leather hard. That's the best time for carving. And honestly, the best tool I think is just sort of a blunt tipped pencil, meaning not super sharp. That tends to be the best sort of surface to carve into your clay. In this example, I'm just gonna write the letters DCAP for my last name. And you could choose to put it in the middle of your pinch pot. You could have it on the outside edge, or you could have it on the bottom here. Anywhere around, wherever you could find space is a good spot for carving your name. So in this example, I'm just gonna write it here where I'm carving my name. Now you can kind of see that the clay is crumbling up. Go ahead and leave that as is for now. I'm gonna show you some different ways to solve the crumb problems in just a minute. And I'm gonna put my last name here. And let's go ahead and assume that I'm in period 1. You could put P1, you could put period 1. Either way works for me. And one trick that I like to use is actually to use a wet paintbrush. And if you run a wet paintbrush kind of through the cracks, through the carve lines of your name, you could see how you could kind of clean up some of those crumbs through that little valley there. And then you may need to carve right back into it again. But once that kind of clears up, you could see how you can start to define out your name and your period number. It is a project requirement to have your name and period number carved into it. It is important to be able to get your project back to you and put in the right spot on our ceramics patio and make sure that we know whose project is everyone. So that's a little bit about an even opening, smooth walls, a nice even and centered foot, and a little bit of carving your name on your project to detail out your work.